Growing up in Cincinnati, I always believed that the two things a man could count on were a firm handshake and a man's word. My father built everything he had on those two principles. A modest renovation company that eventually grew into one of the more respected general contracting businesses in the greater Cincinnati area. He used to say that you could survive losing money, you could survive losing a job, but you could never survive losing your integrity. I carried that with me through every deal I ever made, every wall I ever framed, every roof I ever put over someone's head. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 47 years old. And what I am about to tell you is the story of how I discovered that the two people I trusted most in this world had been living a lie, and how everything I had learned from my father ended up being the very thing that saved me. I have known Derek since our freshman year at Ohio State. We met in the same dormitory, argued over the same football games, pulled all-nighters studying for the same economics exams. When I started web construction after working under my father for nearly a decade, Derek was the first person I called. He was in commercial finance by then, good at what he did. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were the most important person there. I trusted him the way you trust someone who has seen you at your worst and stayed anyway. He was the best man at my wedding. He was the first person I called when my father passed away 3 years ago. My wife Sandra and I met through Derek, actually. Derek and his wife Yvonne had been hosting a dinner party, and Sandra was there as a colleague of Yvonne's. Both of them worked in the same commercial real estate network at the time, though Sandra had since moved into marketing consulting on her own. She was sharp, confident, put together in a way that made you feel like she had already thought 5 steps ahead of everyone in the room. She had been married once before, briefly, in her early 30s. No children. She said she had outgrown that chapter. At the time, I took that as maturity. Later, I would understand it differently. We dated for about a year before I proposed. We got married quietly, just close friends and family, on a Saturday afternoon in October, with the leaves turning over the hills in northern Kentucky. I had a prenuptial agreement drawn up, not because I distrusted her, but because the business was my father's legacy and I was not about to let anything threaten it. Sandra signed it without much argument. She said she respected the fact that I was protecting something that mattered. I liked that about her. For the first 3 years, things were good. Business was steady, growing even. I had 2 longtime employees, Ray and Pete, both of whom had been with me since before my father passed, who had become more like partners over the years. They handled job sites when I was in meetings, managed crews without being asked, and covered for me more times than I can count. They were loyal in the way that only comes from years of going through hard things together. Ray had gone through a divorce himself, and I had helped him through it. Pete had lost his brother, and I had sat with him at the funeral home. We were not just employer and employees, we were something closer than that. Sandra started changing about 8 months before everything fell apart. I noticed it the way you notice a slow leak. You do not see the water at first, you just start to feel the cold. She was distracted during dinner, checking her phone more than she used to. She started working late on projects she was vague about when I asked. She seemed slightly irritated by my presence in our own home, as if I had become an inconvenience in a schedule I was no longer part of. I told myself it was the stress of a growing client list. I told myself I was reading too much into it. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon in February. I was having lunch with a longtime client of mine named Gerald, a retired contractor who had helped me get my first major commercial account. Gerald is the kind of man who says exactly what he thinks and does not apologize for it. We were sitting at a diner off of Route 50 when he put down his coffee cup and looked at me the way you look at someone when you have something difficult to say. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Go ahead," I said. "Were you and Sandra in Columbus last weekend at the Renaissance Hotel?" I set my own cup down slowly. "No," I said. "I was here. I had a site visit Saturday morning." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was there for a conference. I saw Sandra in the lobby Friday evening. She was with a man. I thought it might have been you at first because you two seemed comfortable together, close. But when I got nearer, I could see it was not you." "Did you recognize him?" I asked. Gerald looked at me steadily. It was Derek. I did not say anything for a long time. Gerald did not push. He just sat there and let me have whatever silence I needed. After a while, I thanked him, paid for the lunch, and drove back to the office. I did not call Sandra. I did not call Derek. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for about 20 minutes looking at the dashboard and deciding what kind of man I was going to be about this. I did not confront them. That was the first decision. Because I had learned something over 20 years of running a business. When you confront someone before you have all the information, you lose the advantage. You tip your hand. You let them build a story around your anger instead of around the truth. My father used to say that patience was not weakness. It was preparation. So I prepared. Over the next several weeks, I was methodical. I reached out quietly to Ray and Pete separately and told them I needed their help with something personal. I did not ask them to do anything dishonest. I did not ask them to break any laws. I asked them to watch, to document, and to be ready. They both agreed without hesitation. Ray said he had always had a bad feeling about Derek. Pete just said, "Tell me what you need and I am in." That was enough. What they found over those weeks confirmed everything Gerald had told me and then some. Sandra and Derek had been meeting regularly. Columbus, Louisville, once in Indianapolis. The affair had been going on for at least 6 months, possibly longer. Derek was also, according to his own wife Yvonne, behaving strangely. He had been distant, evasive, making financial moves she did not understand. She had hired her own private investigator already. She told me this over the phone the night I finally called her, after Ray confirmed a trip where both Sandra and Derek had checked into the same hotel in Louisville under Derek's name. Yvonne was quiet for a long time after I told her what I knew. Then she said something I have thought about many times since. "I already knew," she said. "I just didn't want to be right." I understood that completely. Here is what I also learned during those weeks, and this is important. Derek had approached Sandra about a business opportunity. He had been telling her that if she could access information about my active contracts and current client accounts, he could help position a competing bid through a third-party firm he was quietly involved with. He believed, apparently, that once Sandra and he were together and my company was destabilized, they could essentially poach my major accounts and fold them into a new venture. Sandra had already forwarded him several documents from my shared home office drive. Nothing that would hold up in a corporate espionage case necessarily, but enough to show intent. Enough to show that this was not just an affair. It was a coordinated effort to take what I had built. That changed things for me. An affair is one kind of wound. What they were planning was something else entirely. I spent about a week deciding on my next steps carefully. I talked through everything with Ray and Pete over 2 evenings at Ray's kitchen table. I told them what I was thinking, and I asked for their honest input. Ray said, "We need to make sure you are protected first, before anything else." Pete said, "Whatever you decide, we back you." We talked until nearly midnight both times, drinking coffee and going over every angle. By the end of the second evening, we had a plan. It was not flashy. It was not dramatic. It was patient and precise, which is exactly how my father taught me to build anything worth keeping. The first part was straightforward. I had a quiet meeting with my attorney and restructured several business assets that had been loosely titled in a way that a contested divorce might have complicated. Nothing improper. My attorney made sure of that, but careful, the way any smart business owner should have already done it. The prenuptial agreement was solid, but there were a few edges worth tightening. We tightened them. The second part involved Derek's professional situation. Over the years, Derek had mentioned certain things about how he structured fees within his firm. Things that floated in a gray area that he seemed comfortable with, but that I had always filed away in the back of my mind as information. I did not fabricate anything. I did not manufacture evidence. What I did was contact an old acquaintance of mine who worked in commercial banking compliance and have a straightforward conversation about a hypothetical situation involving fee structures that might not meet current regulatory standards. I did not name Derek. I did not have to. My acquaintance told me what the proper reporting channel would be for something like that. I thanked him and ended the call. A week later, Pete, not me, filed the routine inquiry through a consumer financial protection channel about a transaction structure that matched exactly what Derek had described to me years ago over drinks when he thought he was impressing me. Pete used his own name. He had no personal grievance to declare. It was simply a citizen inquiry about a specific type of transaction. Whether regulators chose to look more closely at Derek's firm after that was entirely up to them. Neither Pete nor I ever contacted them again. The third part required the most timing. I told Sandra I had a week-long site inspection trip to Denver scheduled in mid-April. I gave her 2 weeks advance notice, just enough time. I told her I would be leaving on a Monday and returning the following Monday. I would not have reliable cell service at the remote site location. If she needed to reach me urgently, she should call the general contractor's main office line in Denver, which I gave her and which was completely real. What I did not tell her was that I had no intention of being in Denver past Wednesday. On Monday morning, I kissed my wife on the cheek, put my bag in the truck, and drove to the airport. I checked into a flight to Denver. I called Sandra from the Denver airport when I landed and told her the flight had been smooth. I checked into the hotel, went to a real meeting with a real subcontractor on Tuesday morning, and on Tuesday night, I flew back to Cincinnati on a late regional flight under Ray's name, which he had booked using his own frequent flyer account and his credit card. He met me at a side entrance of the airport. We drove back in his truck. I stayed in the spare room at his house. Nobody knew I was in town except Ray and Pete. I am not going to walk through every specific thing that happened over those 4 days in detail, because some of it is still technically under review by the lawyers, and I will not get ahead of that. What I will tell you is this. By Friday afternoon, I had documentation, witnessed, and time-stamped that gave my attorney everything she needed to establish both the nature of the affair and the attempted business interference. Sandra had accessed my shared drive twice during those 4 days. She had forwarded material to an email address we had already linked to Derek. Derek had, during that same window, submitted a preliminary business inquiry to one of my top 3 accounts using a shell company name, a company that Ray had already flagged to my attorney 2 weeks earlier. I flew back to Denver Friday night, arrived Saturday morning, went to a legitimate site visit I had scheduled for Saturday afternoon, flew home Sunday evening. Sandra picked me up at the airport. She asked how the trip went. I said it was productive. She said she was glad. We drove home mostly in silence, which was not unusual by that point, and I went to bed early because I had an early meeting Monday morning. That Monday morning meeting was with my attorney. 2 hours later, Sandra was served with divorce papers at our house. I was not there when it happened. I was in a conference room reviewing the final asset documentation with my attorney and Ray and Pete, who were both present as witnesses. My attorney told me afterward that Sandra called the number she had for me and I did not answer. I did not answer because I was busy and because I had already said everything I needed to say on the drive home from the airport, without saying a single word. Derek found out about the divorce filing through Sandra, apparently within the hour. He called me twice. I did not answer. He texted 3 times. I saved the texts and forwarded them to my attorney without reading them closely. I had no interest in whatever explanation he had assembled for himself. The regulatory inquiry into Derek's firm became something more formal about 3 weeks after the divorce was filed. I learned about it secondhand through mutual acquaintances. Derek's name was specifically mentioned in connection with a fee structuring practice that a former client of his had apparently also flagged independently, around the same period as Pete's inquiry, a coincidence that the investigators found worth examining closely. Whether those 2 inquiries reinforced each other, I cannot say for certain, but Derek was put on administrative leave from his firm by the end of April. What happened next with the business interference claim was more straightforward. My attorney sent Derek's attorney a letter outlining what we had documented. The response came within 72 hours. Derek agreed to withdraw the inquiry he had filed with my client, pay a negotiated settlement to cover my legal costs, and sign a non-disclosure agreement. He did not admit to anything in writing. He did not have to. We both understood what the document meant. Sandra contested the divorce for about 3 weeks. Then she reviewed the prenuptial agreement with her own attorney, and the contesting stopped. She received what she came into the marriage with, a sum that was modest compared to what she had apparently been expecting. She moved out of the house in late May. She did not leave a forwarding address with me. She left it with Yvonne, of all people, which struck me as either an act of extraordinary delusion or simple force of habit. Yvonne filed for divorce from Derek 2 days after I filed mine from Sandra. She'd already been working with her own attorney for weeks. She had a prenuptial agreement as well. She had insisted on it when they married, she told me later, because she had watched her mother get nothing in a divorce and she swore it would never happen to her. Derek's administrative leave and the settlement payment made his financial position considerably less impressive than it had looked on paper a year earlier. His attorney negotiated hard. Yvonne's attorney negotiated harder. During those months, Yvonne and I spoke often. At first it was practical, comparing what our attorneys were finding, checking in on each other's timelines, making sure neither of us was being caught off guard by anything the other side had filed. But the conversations gradually became something else. She was easy to talk to in the way that people who have been through real things are easy to talk to. She did not perform her emotions. She did not need to fill silence with noise. She had built her real estate business herself from a single rental property she purchased at 26 with money she had saved working 2 jobs, and she ran it with the same quiet discipline that I tried to bring to web construction. We had more in common than I had ever noticed in all the years we had sat across from each other at dinner parties. One evening in late June, she called me to tell me her divorce had been finalized. I told her mine had been finalized 3 days earlier, but I had not wanted to say anything until I knew hers was done too. She laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one, and said that was very thoughtful and slightly maddening. I asked if she wanted to have dinner to mark the occasion. She said she thought that would be nice. We met at a restaurant in Hyde Park, the kind of place that is quiet enough to have an actual conversation. She was dressed simply. Dark blazer, no jewelry except small gold earrings. And she looked like someone who had put a hard thing down and was figuring out how to stand up straight again. I recognized that feeling because I was in it too. We talked for 3 hours. We talked about our marriages, about what we had missed, about what we thought we had known about the people closest to us. At one point, she looked at me and said, "Did you know what you were doing when you planned all of this? Or were you figuring it out as you went?" I thought about it for a moment. "I knew the outcome I needed," I said. The middle part I improvised. She smiled and said that sounded exactly like how she had built her business. I told her the full story that night. The way I had come back early from Denver, what Ray and Pete had done, how the regulatory inquiry had come together. I did not minimize anything or leave anything out. I had decided before I walked into the restaurant that if this was going to be anything real, then it needed to start with the whole truth on the table. She listened without interrupting. When I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You could have just divorced her," Yvonne said finally. "You didn't need to do the rest of it." "No," I said. "But they were going to take something that wasn't theirs. My father spent 40 years building what I have. I wasn't going to let someone walk away with it because I was too proud to be strategic." She looked at me for a while. "Did you ever think about just confronting them directly? Screaming at them? Something human like that?" "Every day," I said honestly. "But that would have been for me, not for the outcome." She picked up her wine glass and said quietly, "I think I would have liked your father." I told Ray and Pete what had happened at dinner the following Monday at the office. Ray said it was about time. Pete just grinned and went back to the blueprint he was reviewing. I gave them both an ownership stake in the company that fall, a formal equity arrangement that my attorney drew up, converting years of loyalty and 3 months of extraordinary trust into something real and permanent. It was not charity. It was what was right. They had put themselves on the line for me, and they deserved to have something to show for it. The business side stabilized by the end of summer. The client Derek had approached never formally left. I had a direct conversation with their project manager early on, before any of the legal maneuvering was complete, and I told him plainly what had happened and why they might be receiving competitive inquiries from a source connected to a former associate of mine. He respected the directness. He stayed. That account renewed its contract in September at a higher project value than the previous year. Sandra and Derek were, by all accounts, living together in a rental property in Columbus by late summer. I heard this through the peripheral network that comes with knowing the same people for 20 years. I did not seek out that information, and I did not spend much time thinking about it. What they did next was their business in every sense. Yvonne and I did not rush anything. We had both learned something about what happens when you move forward in the wrong direction, with confidence, and neither of us was in a hurry to make that mistake again. We had dinner once a week, then twice. We drove out to a property she was considering acquiring in northern Kentucky one Saturday in August, and I gave her my honest opinion on the structural condition of the main building, and she gave me her honest opinion about the market value, and we ended up disagreeing about both and spending 2 hours on it, and neither of us was wrong exactly. It was one of the better afternoons I had had in years. By October, I asked her if she wanted to spend the weekend in Columbus. She said she had mixed feelings about Columbus specifically and would I consider Pittsburgh instead. I said I had never been, and she said she had, and it was better than people gave it credit for. We drove up on a Friday. We walked along the rivers, went to the Carnegie Museum because she wanted to, and I was curious, and sat in a bar that Saturday night listening to a local band play something slow and easy. Driving back on Sunday, she fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere around Wheeling, and I drove the rest of the way in quiet, the kind of quiet that does not need to be filled. She moved into a larger house in late winter, a place with more space for her office and a kitchen she actually wanted to cook in. I helped with the move. Ray and Pete helped too, because that is the kind of men they are. The 4 of us had dinner in her new kitchen that night on moving boxes, because the table was still on the truck. And it was the kind of dinner that feels easy and right in a way that only a few things in a life ever do. Ray made a toast. He said he had watched me go through 3 of the worst months of his professional life without losing a single contract, a single employee, or his father's name on the building, and if that was not worth a drink, he did not know what was. Pete said he had only one thing to add, which was that he had suspected Derek was no good since 2019, when he had shaken his hand at the company Christmas party. We all laughed. Yvonne said she should have listened to her instincts earlier too. I said sometimes it takes the right amount of damage to finally trust what you already knew. The regulatory inquiry into Derek's firm concluded formally in early spring. I will not go into what was found or what the outcome was because I genuinely do not know the details, and I have no interest in speculating. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Derek had left the firm and was working in some capacity out of state. Sandra, I was told later by someone in her former professional network, had lost 2 of her major consulting clients after the divorce, and the circumstances surrounding it became known in their shared professional circle. I did not engineer that. That was simply the shape of the truth making itself known, the way it tends to do eventually. My father used to say that a man who builds his reputation over 30 years can see it destroyed in 30 minutes, but a man who builds it honestly can rebuild it in 30 days because everyone who watched him build it the first time will remember. I have thought about that a lot. I think he was right. I think he was also talking about more than just business, though he may not have said so in those words. Things are good now. The company is strong. Ray and Pete are formal partners, and there is something about walking into the office knowing that changes the feeling of the whole place. Yvonne and I are taking things at a pace that makes sense to both of us, which is to say slowly and with some deliberateness and no small amount of happiness. She is building something she cares about, and I am doing the same, and there is a version of the future that has us building something together that neither of us could build alone, and I think about that version more than I expected to. Some people have asked me whether I regret any of it, the approach, the planning, the months of patience while knowing what I knew. I understand the question, but I think it is the wrong question. What I regret is that people I trusted made choices that forced me to spend energy protecting what should never have been threatened. What I do not regret is being my father's son. He built things carefully, protected them honestly, and always made sure that the people who stood with him had something real to stand on. I am trying to do the same.